Frozen and desperate, the alien mother begged, "Shelter us for one night. My children haven't eaten." The wind outside screamed like a dying beast. Snow fell in heavy sheets, slamming against the old cabin walls. Inside, Daniel sat by the fire, nursing a cup of hot tea, his rifle leaning against the table. He lived far from the nearest town, deep in the frozen wilderness, and nights like this reminded him why quiet, isolation, and no one to bother him. But that night, someone knocked on it. Was not a polite knock. It was frantic, desperate. 3 sharp bangs, then silence, then another pounding so hard it made the wooden door shake. Daniel froze. Nobody ever came here in the middle of winter, and especially not in a blizzard. He moved to the door, his hand hovering near the rifle. "Who's there?" he called out. For a moment, there was only the howling wind. Then, a woman's voice, shaking, almost breaking, answered, "Please. Please open. I'll do anything. Just for one night. My children," her voice cracked. "They're freezing. Just feed them. Please." Daniel's gut tightened. He opened the door just a crack. Snow and cold air rushed in, biting at his face. Outside, barely visible in the swirling snow, stood a woman in tattered clothing, her skin pale blue from the cold. Behind her, 2 small figures clung to her legs. They weren't human. The woman's eyes were larger than any human's, with a strange, soft glow. Her skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight. The children had the same glow, their small faces pinched from hunger and frostbite. They were aliens, and they were about to die out here. Daniel had heard of alien refugees before. Ever since the silent war between Earth and the Dravic Empire, small groups of survivors had been found, hiding on remote planets. But the government made it clear, helping them was a crime. Anyone caught could be imprisoned or worse. The woman must have read the hesitation on his face. She stepped closer, her knees shaking. "Take me if you want. Do anything to me. I'll pay however you wish. Just let my children live." Her voice broke again, and one of the children whimpered, coughing weakly. Daniel's mind raced. Letting them in meant risking his life, but sending them away was a death sentence. He looked at the children again. The smaller one's lips were turning purple. Without another word, Daniel yanked the door open wider. "Get inside, now." The woman gasped and hurried in, clutching her children to her chest. Snow fell off their clothes, melting into small puddles on the floor. Daniel slammed the door shut, shutting out the storm. The heat from the fire hit them instantly. The children staggered toward it, holding out their small hands. Daniel grabbed extra blankets from his shelf and wrapped them around their trembling bodies. The woman looked at him with wide, almost disbelieving eyes. "Why?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he poured hot water into a pot and threw in dried meat and vegetables. They need food more than answers. Minutes later, the smell of soup filled the cabin. The children ate first slowly at first, then hungrily, as though they hadn't eaten in days. The woman finally sat down, her hands still shaking. She glanced around the cabin, eyes darting to the rifle, the sealed windows, the small radio in the corner. "You know what they'll do to you if they find us here," she whispered. Daniel stirred the pot, his jaw tight. "I know." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling fire. Then Daniel asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Who's after you?" The woman hesitated, as if deciding whether to trust him. "Hunters," she finally said. They don't care if we're women or children. They're paid to bring in any of my kind, dead or alive." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He'd heard of human bounty hunters who worked for alien warlords. Ruthless men who would track a scent through a blizzard just for a handful of credits. "How close are they?" he asked. She swallowed. "Too close." As if to prove her words, a sound broke through the storm. Faint, but growing. The crunch of heavy boots in snow. Daniel's hand went to his rifle. The woman clutched her children tighter, her glowing eyes wide with fear. If they find us, the crunching grew louder. Multiple sets of boots. Coming straight toward the cabin. Daniel looked at the fire, the soup, the 3 fragile lives now under his roof. His quiet, isolated life had just ended. The cabin was warm, but the air inside had turned cold with tension. Daniel stood near the window, peeking through a small crack in the curtain. The snowstorm made it hard to see, but he caught shadows moving between the trees. "They're here," the woman whispered. Her voice trembled, and she pulled her children closer. Daniel turned to her. "How many?" She shook her head. "I don't know. But I heard at least 4 voices before I ran." Daniel's mind worked quickly. 4 armed hunters against him, in a storm, with 3 vulnerable lives inside. The odds were bad. The sound of boots crunching in the snow grew louder. Now he could hear faint voices, men shouting to each other over the wind. "Check the cabins." One of them yelled. Daniel grabbed his rifle and moved toward the door. "If they come in, stay behind the table and don't make a sound," he said to the woman. The 2 children looked at him with wide, glowing eyes. They didn't fully understand his words, but they understood his tone. Danger. Suddenly, a beam of light flashed through the window. Someone was scanning the cabin with a torch. Daniel stepped away from the window and pressed his back to the wall. The woman clutched the children tightly, her knuckles white. A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Bang! Bang! Open up! Search order from the Central Authority." A rough voice shouted. Daniel didn't move. He knew there was no real search order. This was just a group of bounty hunters using whatever excuse they could. "I said open up." The voice barked again. When Daniel stayed silent, the man outside cursed. "Fine, we'll do it the hard way." The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the storm. They were trying to pry the door open. Daniel took a deep breath and positioned himself near the entrance, rifle ready. He was not going to fire unless they forced their way in, but if they did, he would not hesitate. The woman's breathing grew fast. "If they see us, they'll take the children first," she whispered. Daniel glanced at her. "Not while they're in my house." A loud crack rang out as the doorframe splintered. Snow gusted in through the gap. That was it. Daniel pulled the door open suddenly, slamming the butt of his rifle into the man standing outside. The hunter fell backward into the snow, his weapon dropping from his hand. The others shouted in surprise. One of them fired blindly toward the cabin, the bullet burying itself in the wall. Daniel grabbed the fallen man's weapon and slammed the door shut again. The woman gasped. "You can't fight them all." "Then we don't give them the chance," Daniel replied. He quickly moved to the back of the cabin, pulling open a trapdoor hidden under an old rug. "This leads to a storage tunnel. It comes out near the frozen stream." The woman hesitated. "And you?" "I'll hold them off. You get the kids out." The older child tugged at her sleeve as if begging her to listen. She finally nodded and guided them into the dark tunnel. Daniel closed the trapdoor just as another loud bang hit the front door. Snow whipped in through the cracks, and the voices outside grew angrier. "Kick it in!" One shouted. The door burst open. 4 men stormed inside, guns raised. They wore heavy black coats and metal masks to shield their faces from the storm. The first hunter spotted Daniel and aimed, but Daniel fired first. The shot hit the man's shoulder, sending him crashing into the table. Another lunged forward, swinging his rifle like a club. Daniel ducked, hitting the man hard in the ribs. The cabin filled with shouts, the smell of gunpowder, and the heat of the fire mixing with the freezing air from outside. One of the hunters spotted the trapdoor. "He's hiding them," he shouted. Daniel cursed under his breath and pushed himself harder. He grabbed a chair and hurled it at the man, knocking him down. But the 4th hunter slipped past and started pulling the rug away. Daniel had no time to think. He tackled the man to the ground, wrestling for his weapon. The storm outside roared louder. as if the whole world was holding its breath. Finally, Daniel ripped the weapon free and pointed it at the remaining 2 hunters. "Out," he growled. "Now." They hesitated, then slowly backed toward the door, dragging their wounded partner with them. Daniel kicked the door shut and jammed a wooden bar across it. His heart pounded in his chest. The tunnel. He had to make sure they got out, grabbing his coat. He rushed to the trapdoor and jumped in, the cold earth pressing against his hands. The tunnel was dark, but he crawled fast, following the faint sound of footsteps ahead. If they made it to the stream, they might be safe for now. But Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The tunnel was narrow and cold, the walls wet with ice. Daniel's knees and hands ached as he crawled forward, his breath fogging in the darkness. The sound of the storm above was faint here, replaced by the muffled crunch of the woman's and children's steps ahead. Finally, a dim blue light appeared. The exit. The woman pushed the wooden cover aside and climbed out, pulling the children with her. Daniel followed, his boots sinking into deep snow. The air was biting cold, but it felt strangely fresh after the stuffy tunnel. They were in a small clearing. Beyond it, the frozen stream stretched like a silver ribbon under the moonlight. Tall trees bent under the weight of snow, their branches creaking in the wind. Daniel scanned the area. "We follow the stream north," he said. "It'll lead us to the old logging camp. We can rest there." The woman nodded but kept looking back toward the direction of the cabin. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Hunters never stop." Daniel knew she was right. The storm would slow them, but the tracks in the snow were too easy to follow. They moved quickly, the snow crunching under their boots. The children struggled, their small legs sinking deep with every step. Daniel finally lifted the smaller one into his arms. The child was light, almost weightless, but he could feel the trembling from the cold. Minutes passed. The wind screamed louder. Somewhere in the distance, a faint howl echoed, "Not human." Daniel slowed. "You hear that?" The woman's eyes widened. "Not hunters," she whispered. "Wolves." The howl came again, closer this time. Then another answered from the opposite side. Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened. In this storm, wolves were even more dangerous than men. They were starving. "Keep moving," he said, his voice low. "Don't run. Just keep walking." They followed the frozen stream, the sound of howls chasing them. The children pressed closer to their mother, their glowing eyes darting around in fear. Snow swirled around them, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. But then Daniel spotted movement, dark shapes between the trees, moving fast. Wolves. At least 5 of them, their fur matted with snow, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. They were silent now, stalking. Daniel set the child down gently. "Stay behind me," he said. The lead wolf stepped onto the ice, its paws making no sound. It lowered its head, growling deep in its throat. The others spread out, flanking them. Daniel raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The sound exploded through the forest, but the wolves didn't scatter. They were too hungry. One lunged. Daniel's shot hit it mid-leap, sending it crashing onto the ice. The others snarled and began to circle faster. The woman pulled the children behind a fallen tree. "Daniel!" she shouted as another wolf charged. He swung the rifle like a club, hitting it across the muzzle. It yelped and stumbled back, blood dripping from its nose. But before he could aim again, 2 more wolves rushed from the side. Daniel backed toward the woman and children. "When I say run, run for the far bank," he said quickly. She shook her head. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind." The largest wolf crouched low, ready to spring. Daniel took a deep breath. "Run!" The woman grabbed the children and bolted across the ice. Daniel fired again, hitting another wolf, then turned and sprinted after them. His boots slipped on the frozen surface, but he kept moving. One wolf chased close behind, its claws scraping against the ice. Daniel spun mid-run, fired, and the wolf slid lifelessly across the stream. They reached the far bank, scrambling up into the deeper snow. The howls behind them faded as the surviving wolves stayed to feed on their fallen packmates. Daniel bent over, catching his breath. "They won't follow now," he said. The woman's face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. "The hunters will," she said. Daniel looked down the stream. Somewhere beyond the storm was the old logging camp, a place with walls, maybe even food. But getting there meant more miles in the freezing night. And no guarantee the hunters weren't already ahead of them. Still, there was no choice. He adjusted his rifle, picked up the smaller child again, and nodded toward the dark horizon. "Let's go." As they started walking, a faint light flickered far away through the snow. Daniel didn't know if it was safety or another trap, but he knew one thing: the night was far from over. The snowstorm eased as they moved farther north. The moonlight returned, pale and cold, lighting the frozen stream like a silver road. Daniel's boots crunched in the snow with each step, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. He carried the smaller child in his arms, while the woman held the hand of the older one. Both children were quiet now, too tired to speak. After more than an hour, the dark shapes of wooden buildings appeared ahead, old cabins and storage sheds, their roofs heavy with snow. The old logging camp. Daniel stopped at the edge of the trees, scanning the place carefully. "Stay here," he whispered to the woman. He moved forward slowly, keeping low. The camp was supposed to be abandoned for years. But as he drew closer, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten: a faint orange glow in one of the cabins, flickering through the cracks in the wooden walls. Someone was here. Daniel returned to the woman. "There's a fire burning inside," he said quietly. "Could be travelers, could be worse." The woman's eyes filled with worry. "If it's hunters, I'll check," Daniel interrupted. "Stay hidden until I call you." He left them behind and crept toward the cabin with the light. The snow muffled his steps. When he reached the side wall, he peered through a narrow gap in the wood. Inside, 3 men sat around a small fire. Their coats were thick, but not like hunters' armor, more like scavengers or drifters. One of them was sharpening a long knife. Another sipped from a metal flask. The third leaned back with his boots on a crate, his shotgun resting on his lap. Daniel's gut told him these weren't friendly men. He turned to leave, but his boot crunched too loudly on a patch of hard ice. The man with the knife froze. "You hear that?" The one with the shotgun stood outside, he said. Daniel slipped back behind a shed, his heart pounding. He didn't want to fight, not with the woman and children so close. But if they spotted him... Footsteps crunched in the snow. A shadow passed between the cabins. Daniel gripped his rifle tighter, ready to act if needed. "Nothing here," one of the men called after a moment. "Could have been an animal," another replied. They went back inside. Daniel let out a slow breath and returned to the woman. "They're not hunters, but they're not good people either," he said. "We'll avoid them." They moved around the camp's edge, sticking to the shadows between the storage sheds. Daniel led them to a small cabin farthest from the firelight. The door was half broken, but it would give them shelter for the night. Inside, it smelled of dust and old wood. There was a broken table, some empty crates, and a pile of torn blankets in one corner. "This will have to do," Daniel said. The woman wrapped the children in the least dirty blankets, holding them close for warmth. Daniel started a small fire in the old stove, feeding it just enough wood to keep the chill away without making too much smoke. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the wind outside. Then the woman spoke quietly. "You risked your life for us. Why?" Daniel poked the fire, watching the sparks. "Because I've seen enough people die in the cold." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to read something deeper in his words. But before she could speak again, a sound broke the stillness. Voices. They were outside close. Daniel's head snapped toward the door. He quickly crossed the room, peeking through a crack in the wall. Two of the men from the other cabin were walking past, their breath white in the cold air. "Swear I saw movement earlier," one of them said. "Could be worth checking." "People bring food, tools, easy pickings," the other replied with a grin. Daniel's jaw tightened. The woman's hand gripped his arm. "They'll find us," Daniel thought fast. "We leave now." He doused the small fire, plunging the cabin into darkness. They slipped out the back, moving between the shadows of the sheds. The snow underfoot was soft here, muffling their steps. But as they passed near the main path, the older child stumbled, falling into the snow with a small cry. The men stopped talking. What was that? One of them called. Daniel scooped the child up and ran, the woman close behind. Shouts erupted behind them. Footsteps pounded after them. They darted between two storage sheds and out into the open beyond the camp. The forest loomed ahead, black and cold. "Run!" Daniel urged. They plunged into the trees, branches whipping past them. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but Daniel knew the men could still follow their tracks. Finally, when the shouts were far behind, they stopped to catch their breath. The children clung to their mother, shivering. Daniel looked back through the trees toward the faint glow of the campfires. "We can't go back there," he said. The woman nodded. "Then where?" Daniel pointed north. "There's an old ranger station. If it's still standing, we can lock the doors." They started walking again into the dark forest. Neither of them noticed the single shadow watching them from behind a tree. The third man from the cabin, silently following. The forest was darker now. The moon had hidden behind clouds, and the trees stood like black walls on either side. Snow crunched under their boots, each step slow and heavy. Daniel kept glancing over his shoulder, scanning the shadows. The woman walked close to him, holding both children's hands. The smaller one was half asleep, swaying with each step. "How far?" she asked quietly. "Another mile," Daniel replied. "If it's still standing, we'll be safe for a while." They moved on, their breath white in the freezing air. But Daniel's instincts kept warning him something was wrong. He had been a hunter once, and he knew when someone was tracking him. The silence behind them wasn't natural. Somewhere in the shadows, a twig snapped. Daniel stopped, raising his hand. "Stay here." He moved a few steps back, peering into the trees. The snow was too deep for clear tracks, but he caught movement quick. Then gone. Someone was following. Daniel returned to the woman. "We're being tracked. Don't panic. Just keep walking, but faster." She nodded, her eyes full of fear, and tightened her grip on the children. They pressed on, the snow crunching faster under their boots. The forest began to thin, and soon a dark shape appeared ahead, a tall wooden structure, its roof sloping under a thick layer of snow. The ranger station. Daniel led them to the front. The door was half covered by ice, but it wasn't locked. He shoved it open with his shoulder, and they stepped inside. The air was stale but warmer than outside. Broken chairs and an overturned desk lay in the corner. A small iron stove stood against one wall, with a pile of old firewood beside it. Daniel shut the door and dropped the heavy wooden beam into place, locking it. "Sit here," he told the woman and children. "I'll get the fire going." Within minutes, the stove was glowing, its heat spreading through the room. The children curled up near it, their eyes closing. The woman looked at Daniel. "Do you think it's hunters?" "No," Daniel said, checking his rifle. "Not this time. Someone from that camp followed us." Her eyes widened. "Why?" Daniel gave a grim smile. "Some men don't need a reason. They see weakness, they take advantage." Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the wooden walls. Then came a soft sound, snow crunching under slow, careful steps. Daniel's hand went to his rifle instantly. The steps stopped. Silence. Then dash tap. Something brushed against the window. Daniel moved quietly to the side, peeking through a gap. In the curtain, a man stood in the snow, half hidden by the trees. It was the third one from the camp, the one who hadn't chased them earlier. His face was pale in the moonlight, and he held a long hunting knife in one hand. Daniel stepped back and looked at the woman. "He's outside. Don't make a sound." The man outside walked around the station slowly, testing the walls. Daniel could hear the crunch of snow moving from one side to the other. Then the sound stopped again. Daniel waited, muscles tense. He had seen this trick before. Move quietly, make them think you've gone, then strike. A loud crash hit the back wall. The man was trying to force his way in. Daniel ran to the rear door, but before he could reach it, the wood splintered and a hand shot through the gap. Grabbing at the lock, Daniel slammed the rifle butt down on the hand. The man cursed in pain, but didn't back away. Instead, he shoved harder, breaking the door halfway open. Daniel fired once, the blast echoing through the station. The man screamed and stumbled back into the snow, clutching his shoulder. Daniel didn't wait. He kicked the door shut and dropped the beam in place. The woman's voice shook. "Will he come back?" Daniel glanced at the children, who were now wide awake, their glowing eyes fixed on him. If he's smart, no. If he's stupid, yes. They waited in silence for several minutes. The storm outside grew wilder, and the man didn't return. Finally, the woman spoke. "You didn't have to help us, but you did. Why risk it?" Daniel looked into the fire. "Because I've been on the other side of that door, begging for someone to let me in." The woman didn't reply, but her expression softened. As the night went on, the wind outside began to fade. The station was quiet again, but Daniel didn't sleep. He sat by the door, rifle across his knees, watching the shadows. He knew the hunters were still out there somewhere. And when the storm cleared, they would be moving again. This was only a pause, not the end. Morning came slowly. Pale light slipped through the cracks in the ranger station walls. The storm had passed, leaving the forest silent. Snow lay thick and untouched outside, like a white ocean. Daniel was still sitting near the door, rifle in hand. He hadn't slept. Every sound in the night had kept him alert. The wind, the cracking of ice, even the creak of the old wooden beams. The woman sat near the stove, feeding small sticks into the fire. The children were wrapped in blankets, still sleeping, their breathing soft. Daniel looked out the window. For a moment, it seemed peaceful. Then, in the distance, he saw movement. Figures. 4 of them, moving slowly but steadily through the snow. Hunters. Daniel single quotes, S. Stomach tightened. He turned to the woman. "They found us." Her face went pale. "Here? Already?" "They must have tracked us from the cabin," Daniel said. The snowstorm slowed them, but not enough. She looked at her children, fear in her eyes. "What do we do?" Daniel thought fast. The station was solid, but the hunters had guns. They could shoot through the walls, or set the place on fire. Staying here meant getting trapped. "We can't fight them head on," he said. "We'll have to move before they surround us." The woman hesitated. "The children, I'll carry one." "You take the other," Daniel said firmly. He slung his rifle over his back, packed the last of the food into his coat, and stomped out the small fire. "We go out the back, quietly." They slipped into the snow, moving through the trees. Daniel checked over his shoulder. The hunters were still far, but they were following the station's trail directly. "North," Daniel whispered. "There's a frozen ridge. If we cross it, they'll lose our tracks in the wind." For almost half an hour, they moved through the forest. The snow crunched softly under their boots. The woman's breath came in fast clouds. The child in Daniel's arms clung to his coat, shivering. Then dash crack. A gunshot tore through the stillness. Snow sprayed up near Daniel's feet. "They've seen us." He shouted. Another shot rang out, hitting a tree trunk. Bark and ice flew into the air. "Run!" Daniel urged. They sprinted, weaving between trees. More shots followed, echoing through the forest. Daniel didn't fire back. He needed every bullet for when they had no choice but to fight. They reached the base of the frozen ridge. It was steep and covered in hard ice, the wind blowing fiercely across it. Climbing it would be slow, dangerous. But it was their only chance. Daniel went first, finding footholds in the ice and pulling himself up. He handed the child to the woman once he reached halfway, then helped her climb the rest of the way. Behind them, voices shouted in the distance. "They're getting closer." The woman gasped. Daniel turned and fired once, the shot hitting the snow near the hunters. It wasn't meant to kill, just to slow them. They reached the top of the ridge, the wind biting into their faces. The other side was a steep drop into a frozen riverbed. Daniel pointed. "We slide down, fast." He went first, sitting and pushing off. The ice carried him down in seconds. The woman followed with both children, sliding quickly but clumsily. Daniel caught them at the bottom. The wind here was stronger, scattering snow over the riverbed. Their tracks would vanish quickly. For a moment, Daniel thought they might have shaken the hunters. But then boom, a rifle shot echoed, closer than before. A bullet hit the ice near his feet, cracking it slightly. "They're on the ridge," Daniel shouted. He grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her toward the far bank. They scrambled up the snowy slope, breathless and cold. By the time they reached the tree line, Daniel could hear the hunters sliding down the ice behind them. They didn't have much time. The woman looked at him desperately. "We can't outrun them forever." Daniel knew she was right. He turned toward the trees ahead. "There's a narrow pass not far from here. One way in, one way out. If we reach it first, I can hold them off while you and the kids hide." They pushed forward, every step heavy with exhaustion. The pass finally came into view, two tall cliffs of rock, with just enough space between them for a single person to walk through. Daniel ushered the woman and children inside. "Go to the far end and stay low. Don't come out until I call." "You," she grabbed his arm. "Daniel, go," he said sharply. She hesitated, then nodded and hurried away with the children. Daniel turned back toward the snow, rifle ready. The hunters emerged from the trees, 4 dark shapes against the white. They spread out slowly, weapons raised. Daniel took cover behind a rock, his finger tightening on the trigger. He had only a handful of bullets left. The first hunter stepped forward. "Give them up and maybe we'll let you live." Daniel's voice was steady. "Come and take them." The wind howled between the cliffs as the hunters advanced, their boots crunching in the snow. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He was ready. This would be the fight that decided everything. Snow swirled in the narrow pass, carried by the sharp wind. Daniel stood behind a jagged rock, rifle in hand, his breath steady but cold in his chest. The 4 hunters advanced slowly, their black coats flapping in the wind. Their faces were hard, eyes fixed on him. "You can't win," the lead hunter called out. "Step aside, give us the aliens, and you walk away alive." Daniel didn't move. "You're not taking them." The man smirked. "Why throw your life away for them? They're not even your kind." Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "They're alive." "That's enough." The hunters spread out, trying to flank him. Daniel aimed and fired. The first shot hit the snow, just inches from one man's foot, making him jump back. Another hunter raised his weapon, but Daniel fired again, this time hitting his shoulder. The man cried out and fell back into the snow. The others took cover behind rocks, returning fire. Bullets cracked through the cold air, chipping the stone near Daniel's head. He ducked and reloaded quickly. Down the pass, the woman held the children close, whispering to keep them calm. They could hear the gunfire and the shouts, but they stayed low. Just as Daniel told them, Daniel peeked around the rock and spotted one hunter trying to climb the cliff for a better angle. He fired, sending the man tumbling back down. 3. Left, Daniel muttered under his breath. The lead hunter called out again, his voice sharp. You think you can protect them forever? Even if you kill us, more will come. Daniel ignored him. Words didn't matter now, only seconds did. 2 hunters rushed forward together. Daniel fired once, hitting one in the leg, dropping him to the ground. The second reached Daniel's cover and swung his rifle like a club. The blow knocked Daniel back, his shoulder slamming into the rock. Pain shot through him, but he held onto his weapon. The hunter lunged again, and Daniel blocked with the rifle's barrel, twisting it to slam the man into the cliff wall. The hunter gasped, wind knocked out of him, and Daniel used the moment to shove him away. The lead hunter was the only one still standing strong. He stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching in the snow, his gun aimed directly at Daniel's head. You've got 1 shot left, the man said. Make it count. Daniel's grip tightened. He could see the man's eyes cold, certain of victory. Then behind the hunter, movement caught Daniel's attention. The woman. She had left. The children hidden and now held a large rock in her hands, moving quietly through the snow. The hunter didn't see her until it was too late. She swung the rock hard, striking him on the side of the head. He staggered, dropping his gun. Daniel didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, pressing the barrel of his rifle to the man's chest. Walk away, he said. The man glared at him. Then at the woman. This isn't over, he spat. Here it is, Daniel replied. He fired into the snow beside the man's foot, the blast making him jump. Then he pointed toward the open forest. Go. The lead hunter stumbled back, grabbing the wounded with him. Within moments, they were gone, their dark shapes vanishing into the white distance. Silence returned to the pass. Daniel lowered his rifle, his breath heavy. The woman rushed to the children, who were still hiding at the far end. They clung to her, their glowing eyes filled with relief. Daniel walked over. They're gone, he said. For now. The woman looked at him for a long moment. You could have left us. You could have walked away that first night. Daniel gave a small smile. And let 2 kids freeze in the snow? Not a chance. The older child stepped forward shyly and touched Daniel's hand. It was a small gesture, but full of trust. The woman's voice was soft. We owe you our lives. Daniel shook his head. You don't owe me anything. But if you want to stay hidden, we'll need to move far from here. There are places in the mountains the hunters won't dare go. She nodded slowly. Then we go together. As they left the pass, the snow began to fall again, soft, quiet, covering their tracks. The wind had calmed, and the forest ahead seemed less dark than before. Daniel led the way, the woman close behind with her children. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in many nights, they walked with hope. In the endless white wilderness, hope was worth fighting for.